Get around, get around. If I can move you guys slightly off in this direction. There we go, perfect. Okay guys, so I'm gonna speak a bit about food, which before I do, quick question, any vegetarians or vegans here? I'm so sorry, wrong country. We do have a bunch of vegetarian dishes over here. The vegans, if you look very closely, there's grass between these cobbled streets. For the vegetarians, we do have one vegetarian dish, which is the fried cheese. We have a beautiful, beautiful culture here, but one thing that will become very apparent throughout the tour is that the Czechs, we're very bad at naming stuff. If a Czech person names something, they will literally look at it and describe exactly what they see, and that will be the name of that thing for hundreds of years. Again, you'll see this later on in the tour as well. But the fried cheese is exactly what it sounds like. It is a piece of cheese that is fried, which is absolutely great if you have the taste buds of an 8-year-old, like I do, or, and this never happens to anybody on my tours, but if somehow in the capital city of beer you wake up with a hangover, fried cheese. So this is your right out. Which for those of you who enjoy meat, welcome to the best country ever, because our cuisine is meat with meat with meat with meat with meat sauce. That's the spirit.
No, me.
Well, he was a vegan 2 minutes ago. Kids, they change their minds all the time. But when it does come to meat, our main national food is called knedlové trozello, which directly translates to pork sauerkraut bread dumpling. And you'll never guess what it is. It's pork, sauerkraut, and bread dumpling. We're also quite famous for our goulash, which goulash in this part of, like saying that goulash is ours in this part of the world are fighting words, because every country around this part of the world will claim that they have the best goulash and they have the original goulash. And again, I've been doing this for 8 years, I've done my research. We don't have the original goulash. What goulash is, by the way, just take a couple steps back, it's a very broad definition because many different countries in this part of the world eat the same thing but in different ways. So for example, you'll have a Czech goulash. It's very similar to the same goulash that most Germans and Austrians eat. So it's a beef stew with paprika. We eat it with bread dumplings, potato dumplings, raw onion sausage. We eat it with a knife and a fork. But then if you go east of here to Slovakia, they'll eat it more as a very spicy soup. It's a fairly communal sort of food. And then if you go to Hungary, they'll eat it as this very thick sort of stew, also with a spoon, sometimes out of a bread bowl, depending on how touristy you're gonna get about it. But when it does come to the origins of goulash, I have done my research. It is a Hungarian food. With that said though, they have the original one, we have the best one. Skip theirs, eat ours. But if you do want to eat something in the Czech Republic that you couldn't get anywhere else, I heavily recommend this food, and you'll be able to come back home to your friends and family and tell them about the bizarre stuff that you ate here, and that is called ceviche, which ceviche directly translates as candle food. Why do we call it candle food? Because you want to eat it during a romantic candlelit dinner. So you don't see what you're eating because it's a bit of a weird dish. Now work with me, use your imagination. We start off simple. Beef tenderloin with cream sauce. That's normal civilian food. But this is where we get weird. We take a can of cranberry or strawberry jam, put it on a spoon, put that on the meat, and then we get even weirder because we take a can of sweet whipped cream, shake that puppy up, then put it on top of the meat, and then the pièce de résistance is like a little bit of lemon that we put on top of the meat so it has a little hat. I'm seeing a lot of like disgusted faces, and I've seen those faces in restaurants where like somebody brings this to a tourist and they're like, is the chef okay? This doesn't seem like the sort of food that somebody who's alright in their mind would be making. And then they take a bite and they're like, yeah, somebody should go check on the chef. This doesn't taste like stable food. But then after a couple more bites, those tastes, they start to mix into each other, and they create something that is known as traditional Bohemian sweet meat cuisine. Now, by the way, you're in Bohemia right now, the province of Bohemia, back in the day known as the Kingdom of Bohemia. And the reason why this area is called Bohemia is because back in the day, you would have the Boii tribe living over here. When the Romans come through, they see the Boii tribe, they say the Boii live here, which would be Boiheim, and voila, that's why they call this area Bohemia. And a lot of people say that our food that we have right now comes as tradition from the Boii tribes, because they would cook both their meats and their sweets in the same exact pot to save time and resources, to kind of, you know, be quick about making their food. So we don't really have a lot of desserts in our cuisine. We just kind of chuck sugar on a steak and call it a day. Like we'd have like dumplings filled like marmalade or something, but ceviche, if you're looking for dessert, just grab a ceviche and call it a day. With that said, if you guys are looking for a good place to get good, inexpensive Czech food, we're standing right outside of a place that's literally called Česká kuchyně, which means Czech cuisine. And if you're looking for traditional Czech food in the center, this is a great place to get it. But also, I'm gonna speak slightly quietly, maybe get you guys slightly closer together because I'm about to talk some trash about this place. We are not known for good service. In fact, we were voted to be the worst service industry just so you can properly appreciate the city as you walk through it. But so before I get into contemporary history, let's talk a bit about what this place actually is originally. 14th century, Charles IV would establish this area originally as the horse market. Now, by the way, if you remember anything from my tour, let it be this. 1-2 tours, Mike, Google reviews, 5 stars. Remember 2 things. To make the second one, Charles IV, 14th century. The grand majority of everything we're gonna see today was established by Charles IV from the 14th century. You ever see an old looking building and you're wondering who built it? Most likely Charles IV from the 14th century. If I ever point at an old building and I ask you who built it, it's always Charles IV in the 14th century. And I'll speak about Charles IV from the 14th century later on, but for the time being, all you need to know is that he established a lot of things over here. Including this street, originally known as the Horse Market. Now, knowing what you know about Czech naming conventions, you'll never guess what this street was back in the day. A giant horse market. Essentially a long stretch of road where people sold horses, and if you sell a lot of horses in one spot, it's not going to be very good real estate because it doesn't smell very good, and in general people didn't want to live here, so you would get a lot of the lower dregs of society living here, a lot of prostitutes, a lot of beggars, a lot of drunkards, in small wooden shacks essentially lining this side of the city. Not a very classy part of the city, and remained in that very classy part all the way until the 19th century. In the 19th century, these lands are part of Austria-Hungary. There's a movement out here called the National Revival, Czechoslovakian Czech National Revival, and in this revival you have people going out and writing books and operas and plays and poems about what it means to be Czech, to give us a common national identity. Then you also have people going out and writing a stable grammar, writing dictionaries, so they can all speak one common tongue. And thirdly, and most importantly for us on this tour right now, we have people going out and renaming, rebuilding, putting up monuments, so we can be proud of our national heritage. In the 19th century, this area is where we also rebuilt many of these wooden shacks into these Art Nouveau buildings you see today. We had 2 very important structures. The first one, all the way there in the back, dominating the entire square, is the National Museum. If you like museums, don't have museum pictures, but also, if you're not a big museum person, but you're so curious about what that building looks like on the inside, you don't have to go inside. You just watch the good old Hollywood blockbuster Mission Impossible 1. In the opening scenes of that movie, you have Tom Cruise breaking into the American Embassy from the National Museum right over there. I promise you the American Embassy is a much more important building on it. With that said, much more importantly, you have a statue of a man on a horse marching outside of the museum. There's a statue of Saint Wenceslas. Now, you might be familiar with Saint Wenceslas. I mean, it's a hodgepodge of culture, so you might not be. You might be. He's the same guy from the Christmas Carol, Good King Wenceslas. Na 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 na, that's a lot of blank looks. Don't worry, I won't sing again until the end of the tour. But if you know that song, that's the guy. Ironically enough, it's Good King Wenceslas. The guy was never a king, he was a duke. But if people sing songs about you a couple hundred years later, as we'll get your head wrong. With that said, what he's much more importantly known for is being the patron saint of the food. As legend goes, if you are ever to be invaded by a foreign nation, Saint Wenceslas will come down from the hills with his unkillable army and save the Czechoslovakian people from any invaders and make sure this land is ruled by the people who should be ruled by. Not a good means of national defense. Never came down during any of the medieval invasions. It didn't come through when the Nazis came through. It did not come through when the Soviets came through. The French out there. Now, quite often people come up to me on the tour and they say, Mike, what was life like when you guys were a part of the Soviet Union? We're not a part of the Soviet Union. During the Cold War, we were an independent state. Independent state. Which means that on paper we were an independent democracy, but heavy bans on freedom of speech, heavy bans on travel, heavy bans on political dissidency, heavy bans on a variety of different religious activities. And in general, we did have free democratic elections. We could vote for the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, or not vote. Those are the only 2 options. So we were essentially a puppet state for Moscow. Everything that moved out here moved with the Kremlin's permission, and if something was moving independent of the Kremlin's permission, it stopped moving very, very quickly. That's from 1948 until 1989. Heavy ban on freedom of speech, political freedoms, travels, artistic creation. In general, a rough time for the Czechoslovakian people. There is a small break in the system, however, in the year 1968. When a man by the name of Alexander Dubček comes to power, and he becomes the head of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, and thus the de facto leader of the Czechoslovakian nation. He issues a series of reforms that are known as the Prague Spring Reforms. Then these reforms were given a bit more freedom. So all of a sudden, we also have newspapers that are now owned by the state, which, by the way, big deal for freedom of speech. Theater, famous for the story of a man you might have heard about before, by the name of Wolfgang Amadeus. so much. Easier, nothing is worse than somebody yelling the wrong answer with a strange amount of confidence. I once had a guy, same guy who yelled pirates, by the way. I once had a guy yell beef oven. By the way, not Beethoven, he yelled beef oven. And I fell in love with that name so much. I got my dad a dog a couple years ago after he retired, and I really wanted to call it beef oven, but my dad's like, oh, it's not an appropriate name for a female dog. Or something else. Anyway, the story of Mozart's admission to the State Theater starts off in Vienna at the premiere of The Marriage of Figaro, and as the story goes, everybody familiar? Marriage of Figaro? We've all seen Looney Tunes, right? Figaro, Figaro, Figaro. That premieres in Vienna, and as the story goes, it is not a very successful premiere. People say that it is boring, it is uninteresting, and you fall asleep during this opera. Partially, this was just a taste of Vienna at the time, but also during the opening, you have the emperor at the time, Joseph II, sitting in the opera house. And if you're listening to the opera and the emperor's in the house, you're not listening to the opera, you're staring at the emperor's face, trying to figure out how you feel based off of how he looks. And as the story goes, Joseph II was kind of sleepy. So he yawns multiple times, everyone's like, oh, I'm bored too. So the opera fails in Vienna, and Mozart tries to outrun the bad reputation of the opera and come over here to Prague. Which, by the way, can we just take a moment to appreciate the idea of like a man physically moving to outrun the innovation? It's very quaint in the 21st century. And it doesn't work out for him, because he comes over here to Prague to premiere the Marriage of Figaro at the State Theater, and there's already people in the stands being like, I heard they really hated this in Vienna. And then, you know, the opera starts, and the Czechs, you know, we're not very emotional people, we just kind of watch quietly. And then after, to which a lot of historians are like, wait, why is there this big difference between the Taste of Vienna and the Taste of Prague? And there's a lot of very cynical historians that will say, yeah, the reason why we liked it is because we heard they didn't like it in Vienna. Because, and you'll get this quite a bit, when countries are being oppressed, quite often the counterculture will be the exact opposite of the oppressor. And apparently this was a thing that would happen in the Prague opera scene, is you would pay people to walk through the opera house and be like, they hated this in Vienna because it was too complicated for them. And then all the Czechs were like, yeah, this is not too complicated for us. And the opposite, to like sing your competitor's opera, you're like, oh, if you like this opera, you're basically Austrian. Like, what not? So some historians say that that is one of the big reasons why Mozart got such a warm welcome over here. But there's also another group of historians that have a bit more faith in mankind. They say that the main reason why Mozart loved this place so much is because there is a long-standing tradition among the Czechs of encouraging their kids to play as many instruments as they possibly can, starting from the 14th century all the way until today, where if you're born into a family that has enough money for an instrument, you will learn how to play that instrument. It is not a choice, you'll be forced into it. So like growing up over here, there's a bunch of instruments being shoved into your hands. So it's fairly rare to meet a Czech person who doesn't play at least one instrument. We don't necessarily play them well, but we do play them. And because you have kind of this long-standing culture of encouraging kids to play instruments, chances were that the people listening to opera could play instruments, and thus they could appreciate the music. That said, strange sounds on the tour today. With that said, Mozart actually moves over here to Prague. He falls in love with the city. He writes this most popular opera called Don Giovanni. And when it comes to Don Giovanni, it premieres in the State Theater. And I'll show you guys the statue in just a second, but there's a bunch of tourists kind of crowded around it right now, I think snapping a group picture. But essentially, Don Giovanni premieres over here, and he gets a 30-minute standing ovation. For 30 minutes, people clap, which this is clapping for 4 seconds. So you can imagine how long that went on for. And as the story goes, Mozart walks out on stage after the applause finally finishes. He bows one last time, and he says, "My Praguers truly understand me." Which as soon as he says that, we stop clapping. We're like, take out a pen and paper, and we're like, we're gonna write this down. We're gonna use this in our tourism industry. And if you walk around, you see a lot of Mozart museums and Mozart cafes and Mozart liquors and Mozart chocolates. If you walk into some of these cafes, you ask like, why is there a Mozart cafe in Prague? Was Mozart Czech? They will tell you, yes, he was Czech. He said so himself after the premiere of Don Giovanni, which any sort of character that mentions this city, even in passing, we will steal their soul and we will build a tourism industry out of it. Don't worry, I will talk about Franz Kafka later on. With that said, guys, we gotta walk around the statue of Don Giovanni and go over to the Charles University. Yeah, it's ladies and gents, not an art school, not a Dementor, not a Deaf Theater, not a Sip Lord. This is meant to be Don Giovanni, the main character of. Sorry, it's meant to be the Il Commendatore, the main character of Don Giovanni right here. We once upon a time had issues with the statue because drunk people would show up, shove their head inside, and then get stuck. It actually has been gently adjusted. this area over here, not to be able to fit a human head. With that said, do not take this as a challenge. I have seen people get stuck here once, and it's one of the most bizarre like experiences of male friendship. It's like standing over here. It's like after I finished off the pub crawl, I was just having a cigarette, and then there's 3 British dudes who show up. One of them shows his head inside, and then like he's completely stuck. And then like his friends start laughing at him. I remember standing there, so I'm like, oh yeah. But then they pull down his pants and they run away. And they're gone for like 5 minutes. And they don't come back. Where like I had another cigarette, because I'm gonna see what happens. And somebody like called the fire department. They had to like lube up his neck. It's super complicated. Don't shove your heads into any statue. I'm not your mom, but you know, just a bit of advice. But